Okay, we're ready to go. Hello to everyone, and hello to those who are listening later on by YouTube or other means. Um, Good to see you. And we will continue or begin with a vow and the four great vows. I vow to deliver innumerable sentient beings. I vow to cut off endless vexations. I vow to master limitless approaches to Dharma. I vow to attain supreme Buddhahood. Today, we're going to continue on with uh, the topic of living or living in Chan. I think it's very, very important to have this kind of um, a class that applies the right view to our daily lives. I think a lot of people have trouble. They say, "I can sit on a cushion, but when I get up, I'm just uh, tossed and spun around by everything that's going in my life, and I'm having difficulty." And it was what Master Ling Chi had said, that if you don't get this clear, if you don't have right view, that you'll be tossed and turned by whatever events that come up in your life, and you'll never be able to find peace or an understanding. But if you apply it in the right way, it will work for you. So this is where we're going. I want to try to relate all of the doctrine into your daily life so you can practice well. And then also, by that, when you sit to meditate, your meditation will be substantially better than it was, just simply because of the fact that you have this mind of practice at all times, whether you're eating, sleeping, working, enjoying things. You have this mind that's settled, and that's what's important in terms of this. And I think that that's kind of what we're missing. And I think a lot of times what happens is that we think that we have to comport our life into this rigid, or what appears to be a rigid, strict regimen of, let's say, the five precepts. And it's hard for us to fit into the five precepts. And so it's something that we can't quite understand it, but we believe if we comport to the five precepts and to the six paramitas, again, the 37 factors of enlightenment, the eightfold path, if we live our life that way, that magically we're going to turn into a Buddha or become enlightened. But this kind of a thinking is inverted, because it is relying on this corporal body, this sense of self, to reach or aspire to something that you already have, which is the Buddha mind. We don't know that. It is like the one story of the parable of the one son that went out to find his fortune. And when he went out to find his fortune, his father had sewn a very precious uh, uh, jewel inside his coat. So if he ever had a problem, he would realize that he had this with him. And so he went out, faced many, many adversities, and in the lowest point of him trying to make a living outside of his family, he finally touched his coat and realized there was something sewed into his coat. And so he pulled it out, and he looked at it, and it was this gem. And he realized that all the time that he thought that he was poor and unfortunate, he had this gem with him, and he was never really poor. And this parable is one which points to our intrinsic nature, or our Sintamani um, pearl or gem, meaning that this wish fulfilling gem. And that we possess. And I shouldn't say that we possess, and it's very difficult to use language to describe this, but what I should say is that is intrinsically mind. What we have to do is rather than trying to receive mind as something, because we can't really fit mind into consciousness, we can't fit it into the self. No matter how big of an ego you have, how big of a head you are, you can't hold even the smallest part of the universe in your head. But it is this absorption of the self by mind, the correct view, turning the mind's eye inward to look at things and to see that it is not that which is encased in the bubble, but is what the bubble is made out of. It is what all things are made out of. And when we begin to look at things from a different viewpoint, then it's not so hard for us to understand. So all of that's just kind of a preface to actually my lecture. And recently, there's been some events that have happened that inspired me to continue on with this lecture of living. I think a couple of weeks ago I was giving the lecture on that, and I think the week before. But there's a wealth of teachings here that I think now is the time for those who are just coming on and are beginners, and those who have been practitioners for a long time can equally benefit from this lecture series. And what had happened was that these events in my life gave me some epiphanies. Epiphanies are kind of a interesting thing. You'll often hear me talk about epiphanies or realizations, not about enlightenment, but epiphanies are these sudden realizations of something that is truthful or how things work. And the realization is that which once one has this epiphany, they process through by virtue of contemplation of mind, and not necessarily cogitation, not thinking, but the contemplation of what just went through and had an impact on you, and utilizing that and exploring it and seeing what can you do with this. Now, where I'm at, and when I think about these and what can I do with these, it has nothing to do with Gilbert or the events in Gilbert's life other than to practice. But what it is important to me is it gives me another way of presenting the Dharma so that I can assist people. I can be able to help them take away their suffering, take away their illusions, and put them onto the right path and take away their fear. More importantly, take away their desire. So we continue on, and in this, when I see my students having these kinds of epiphanies or realizations, it reminds me of Samantha Badra's 10 vows, and one of them is rejoice in the merits of others. And I certainly rejoice when I see people and they have that kind of a knowingness to it, and I can see that it's working through them. Maybe it's something that I said, maybe it's something that they're doing, but it is the same as when the Buddha twirled a flower, and Kasyapa, later on Mahakasyapa, just simply smiled and nodded. And it's this knowing without the need of saying anything, without the need of expressing anything other than just mind is mind. If the flower is twirling, how could the mind not know that the flower is twirling? There's no need for a human confirmation of that fact. There's no need of any expression of words of that. That's a realization. That's an epiphany. And we use that then in our daily life, because these are very, very powerful events that guide us in terms of how we govern our life. Um, One of the things that that kind of inspired me was I had an exchange with one of my students, and was talking about a particular words of Hui Ning, and Hui Ning talking about how meditation and wisdom are inseparable. And although I was talking about it, I never was particularly satisfied with that translation. So actually, that came up in the translation group where they were talking about what is this correct word from the Chinese script for this word meditation, because then it seems like, oh, well, there's meditation and wisdom, but meditation in that term is very, very limited. It presupposes that somebody is sitting in sitting meditation. But when we change it a little bit and tweak it a little bit, then we discover that, oh my goodness, everything is this meditation. Every moment is this meditation. And this term in Chinese um, is one in which it talks about this meditation more like a samadhi or an awareness of samadhi, this continual awareness that I always talk about, this clear awareness that's there. But that's samadhi. Samadhi is this clarity that keeps the mind stable, keeps it from being obstructed by impressions brought on by the ego and habitual patterns. If we don't have those impressions, imagine you can go through your life, you know everything, but the ego is disconnected. How would you function during the day? Much, much better, right? Much better if your ego is disconnected, not your function, but your ego. You take the ego button out of what you're doing and it functions properly. Some people say, well, then aren't you just like an automaton, some robot? No, it's the opposite. When we give in to the habitual patterns, we are ignorant of the strings that are attaching to us via body, speech, and mind, and dictating from habitual patterns what is the next way we're going to process information via body, speech, and mind, because we get into a habitual pattern of doing things. And so as a result of that, we that's what we believe to be the default setting, but actually it's the default viral setting that allows this virus of the ego to govern what you're going to do next. That's robotic. That's an automaton. When you turn the mind's eye inward and you see things very clearly, moment to moment, there is just a clear awareness of the mind. This is what Hui Ning was talking about. He was talking about using this, and we'll use the term in English, of meditation and wisdom as inseparable. They're not two things, they're combined. But in this way, it is the same as we would say silent illumination. That the vipassana side of this illumination of the mind and this continual processing in a clear way of what is happening, reorienting to the present, to the present moment, to the present moment. Every moment's the present moment. Every moment we clear the mind from these obstructions, not by having to pick them out one by one, but by simply not presenting an environment in which these that fosters these habitual patterns. Master Sheng used to talk about that if somebody had gone into a river and they had leeches on their body, and I don't have any kind of an experience about having leeches on my body, but evidently where he was living, it was pretty rural, so that might have been something. But he said that we don't individually pick them off our body, because if we do, the head still stays inside the skin and can cause an infection. But what we do is then we pour salt on the body, and by the nature of these leeches, they don't like salt, so they will it creates an unfavorable environment for them to live in. This is what meditation and wisdom does, is it creates an unfavorable environment for our confusions and imaginings, our sense of self to stay. And it leaves by its own nature, because its own nature is it's impermanent. It's fundamentally empty, but we don't see it that way because we string it together like a string. And when we string it together, this thought, this thought, this thought, this thought, and then it appears that there's a stream of consciousness. And then we hold on to that stream of consciousness and we say, this is me. But it isn't in that way. Even if you put that down, it does not mean that you just disappear. What it means is all your vexations disappear. Mind remains. So mind is like the in the wheat, it is the wheat germ, the little part that's valuable, and then the chaff, that is something that covers it. It doesn't really show that, and these are like typical sutra explanations. Or gold, and if there's dross on the gold, we may not be able to see the shininess of the gold because it's covered with this and it's obstructed, but it's never been lost, or the wheat germ never was something else. It's always maintained that intrinsic quality to it. And when we see things in this way, it enables us to be able to fully function in the present moment, not necessarily by adhering or purposely adhering to all of these precepts and everything, but by reflecting a mind in which these precepts, these 37 factors, Eightfold Path, the paramitas, are reflected in our own body, speech, and mind. It reflects downward into samsara. We need not think, I have to do this. Wisdom chooses. And in moment to moment to moment, you choose the Buddha. So the Buddha is just this choice of knowing, true knowing, not the knowing from the idea of the ego or the consciousness or whatever, but the knowing of mind itself. There's nothing there that it's grasping. It is just simply flowing naturally. Not bad. And the beautiful thing about all of this is that you all have this nature. And as we go along, I will talk about that a little bit more. So this idea of this meditation is really this awareness that Huineng was talking about. This awareness and wisdom are not two different things. They're one and the same. They're just simply the functioning or representation of the mind as applied to samsara. Or originally, there is no wisdom. But in samsara, it is what is used to navigate through samsara. Is this wisdom? This wisdom, anybody know what the name of this wisdom is? 10 bonus points. Sam?
I got two terms in my head. I got Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, and then I have Prajna Paramita, or
Well,
Maha
pick one.
Prajna Paramita.
You only get one choice.
I want to say Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi.
Okay. Oh, thank you. It's Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, what is in the Heart Sutra, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very clear. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is what is used. They say it is real, not false, because that Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi represents mind itself. And in that way, this wisdom is not separate from mind. So the clarity and awareness is mind. The wisdom is also mind. But they're not two things. There's no duality there. When we practice day to day, imagine if everything is non-dual, what you can accomplish, what you can do. It's hard for us because we go, yeah, but you know, work is really horrible and the people at work are horrible or whatever it is that we do. You know, my child has this problem, my husband has this, or whatever it is. My wife, I don't want to be gender, slam one gender over another, you know, whatever it is, you know, and we just are dwelling in the ego. But if we let go of the ego, then it changes things a lot. It's how we see things, how the perspective is. I'll give you two examples of how to live and also how to die. I mean, if you're here, you should know how to die. You know, how do you want to die? Like kicking and screaming and having ghosts chase you all around your room? Or truly knowing there is no birth, there's no death. So one of the things is that Master Shen had this one lady came to see him, and this is the thing with teachers, well-known advisors, and masters. People always come with their problems to you. You know, they think that you have all of this wisdom, and you may have some, and you lend it to them to help them through things. But she came and she said she had a problem with her husband, and the problem was that the husband was always ab- abusive towards her verbally, very insultive to her. And Master Shen Yang said, "That's wonderful news." Now, you were probably wondering, like, Shifu, how is that wonderful news that this lady's being abused by her husband? And we're not talking about physical abuse. There's a line there. No, but somebody who's just a crotchety old man. Okay. You can be a crotchety old man when you're 20. And I imagine what you're going to be when you're 80, even more so. But she said, you know, but Shifu, he's a bad person. He's always abusive. And he says, but it's good because not everybody in this lifetime gets a petty tyrant to practice from. So he is your practice. Whatever you do, you know, if you can forgive him, if you can understand him, if you transfer merit to him, then you can transfer it to anybody. But you need to practice in this way. And so it's a different viewpoint. I'm not advocating that you have to live in misery with somebody, but if you're going to live in misery and you haven't decided you want to stop that, then there's no reason that you should um, just suffer because that person wants you to suffer. That's in their nature of habitual tendencies is they want you to suffer, so they know the buttons to push. But if you can practice and overcome it, then it's not bad. Another story was one in where this one Rinpoche, a Tibetan master, someone came to him, and it was this lady, and she had been she had cancer, and she was going to all over the places for some kind of a cure. And when you're pretty filled with cancer, there's two options. One of them is you can live your life the best you can. And when I'm not saying that you should stop taking medication, but I'm saying when you get to, stage 4.5, then you have to start thinking about the quality of your life versus trying to save this leaky bucket. And so she finally went to this master and said, Master, I need to tell you that I'm dying. Is there anything I can do? And he said, that's wonderful news. She went, wait, maybe you didn't hear me. I'm dying of cancer. Yes, it's wonderful news. And she said, how can that be wonderful news? And he said, because not everyone has the opportunity in this lifetime to prepare for death. But you have a wonderful option to be able to do the things that you need to do before you leave, to make plans to do things in this way. And so it's wonderful because you can prepare for it. You didn't die in your sleep. You can be prepared. This is good. This is what you do. You have to practice. So it's a different thing. And it was kind of interesting because I went up to San Francisco for a retreat, and I was telling the story. And then during the week after, one of my dearest friends and one of my students from many, many years ago, when I was just beginning to present Buddha Dharma, she came into my office. I'm an attorney by trade, and she wanted to make some adjustments to her trust. And she told me that she has a very serious cancer condition that is essentially, they could do different things to her and remove parts of her body, but it's gotten into the bones. So even if they did that, there's not much that they could do. But her disposition was beautiful, because she was taking care of the thing, taking care of her affairs, making sure everything was in order, finally tweaking the last of her trust and whatever. And that she understood there's no saving this body, no matter what. And if she kept going and was taking the medication, she'd be in the hospital, operations, they might weaken her body. So she understands that essentially life is a match, a lit match. And it was getting close to the end, and she understood that. So living is also knowing how to die. So we want to be able to prepare ourselves. I don't want to bum you guys out or be the announcer of doom, but if anybody ever checked, there's not a that anybody that's lived forever. Okay. And so you have to know this, and then you have to practice. Even in the Chan liturgy, what do they say? We're like fish in shallow water. We should practice as if our head was a flame. This is what we should do. This brings me to the second epiphany. So the first one was mind saying, this is how I can use this. This is really what Master Hui Ning said. when he was talking about meditation and wisdom, it's this clear awareness of the mind and the illumination of the mind that is what is there and is inseparable. And so the second one was that um, I had run into one of my dear students in San Francisco, and he had told me, he had picked me up at the airport, and he was telling me that before he came to practice with me, he had a severe stroke that affected his body. I think his sight and his hearing was gone for a while, and it was slowly being revived. But he too realized that this was a burning match that was might be pretty close to the end. And so again, he was one that practiced as if his head was aflame. And he practiced not for the sake of living, but for the sake of understanding, trying to make make up as much ground as he could after he heard right view. When he heard right view, it was something that was interesting, but yet hearing the right view, it still kept going over his head, over his head. And so what he would do is he would always repeat what I said. And as his way of doing, that's why I called him the parrot, because he was always repeating. It wasn't bad. It was a term of endearment, actually, because it was like an echo. I could test what I was saying anywhere because he would repeat it back. But he was approaching this very sincerely. He wanted to find out, but intellectually, he couldn't do it. Not because he was stupid. It wasn't that. It was that he just this was something new to him. Right view is not something that you can get right out of the box unless you've been practicing for several lifetimes, and then boom, it happens. But to many, it's an acquired taste. It takes time to redirect the mind, to turn the mind's eye inward. So that's not an easy thing for many people, even if they've been practicing for many, many years. But what he did, and he told me, he said, you said one day about this one person that was was one of the Buddha's disciples, and he couldn't get anything. He couldn't understand what the Buddha was saying. His name was Sudipantaka. Hopefully, I didn't butcher the name too bad. Sudipantaka.
Chu, C, right? Is
No, it's Suddhipantaka.
Sudhi Pantaka.
Sudipantaka. Okay, thank you. And there's a different spelling from a different source that starts with Ksudra, and then the rest of it the same. But
That
I
would just
seem
be
to,
Shuddhi.
yeah. So
Very similar.
I think the first spelling enables it to do. I didn't quite get the accents right, but in any case, this particular story was one that I told it during a lecture, and it was one that he really understood it. And I'm going to go into it in detail, but I wanted just to kind of give you a preface to it, where at the very end, Sudipantaka was saying, the ground is clean, but is my mind ground clean? And so he was looking into this. The ground is clean because he was so difficult to practice. The Buddha just set him in the courtyard to sweep. So I'll tell you the whole story now. That was just kind of like the beginning one. And this story comes, most of it comes from the master Sheng. I kind of adjusted the story a little bit to make it more accurate in terms of doctrinally, but the story is, I want to give him credit for the story so you don't think that these are all my words. And this one, he was saying, one day while the Buddha was walking past the door of the monks' quarters, he heard Suripantaka crying loudly. And near him, there was a bunch of monks, and they were all making fun of him and for being so foolish, because Suripantaka could not understand any part of the verses that he was set upon to understand. Anything that the Buddha had said, it was difficult for him to remember it. He just couldn't do it. He was so sad that at the end, he just said to the Buddha, I came here because my brother wanted to follow you, and I too want to follow you. I believe in what you're saying. I just don't understand it. I can't get it. I try and I try and try, and I can't even remember even the basic things. I can't do that. And so the Buddha said, he said, I want to leave the monastery. And the Buddha replied, don't worry about how much you know or you don't know. That's not important. It is a form of wisdom to realize that one is ignorant. Please remember this. It is a form of wisdom to realize that one is ignorant. And I'm very happy when I see people nodding their head, because it doesn't mean that you're ignorant, because the next part says, it is a form of ignorance to believe that one is wise. So please remember these, because this is what keeps us humble. We have to be humble. We cannot say, I never think, oh, Gilbert is so wise. I really try my best to pass on the best Dharma to you, but I don't see myself as sagacious or wise. I just see myself as a vehicle of the Buddha mind to do my best. And so he says, come with me now. Following this exchange, the Buddha began spending extra time with Suripantaka. He began to teach him to repeat the phrase, sweep and clean, sweep and clean. Suripantaka, he couldn't even remember that. He couldn't remember these simple words. When the other monks learned of this, they decided that Suripantaka was beyond all hope. Just get rid of him, have him go. And so they had no patience with him. He was undesirable because he could not understand the Buddha's teachings. It reminded me of Shifu at one retreat, and he asked everybody, what if a butcher came and wanted to practice with us? A butcher that always butchering the animals every day butchering the animals. Do you think that we should let him practice with us? And the people were going, oh no, Shifu, that person is so undesirable. They're so horrible. They kill and kill and kill all the time. This is bad. And so finally he looked at me, and Shifu would be like this. And then he would just go, Gilbert, what do you think? And I said, Shifu, of anybody, who more needs the Dharma than a butcher? Who more needs that? And Shifu just nodded his head and said, yes, why not? None of us are perfect. He also told the story of this one monk. This gives you encouragement for if you think that you're not perfect enough to practice the Dharma. This one monk whose Dharma was very, very good. His Dharma was like right on. The only problem was in the monastery was he was an alcoholic. And so he was frequently drunk. And all the monks didn't want him. They just went, we don't want him here. But the master was clear that he knew the Dharma better than they did. No, he couldn't, he had this weakness, but his Dharma was good. And so it's very interesting because Shifu was kind of saying that we have to see things as they are. We have to see things clearly. Here, the Buddha's compassion towards this person that was not born with the brightest of minds, but had the aspiration, he had the sincerity to practice well. And so he just kept with this. And this is why in every single class I give, and when I hear people say, even in the class that I gave in San Francisco, people will say, well, this is a stupid question. I say, there's no such thing. Not to me. There's not a stupid question. Maybe you might say things that may not be acceptable or whatever, but if the question is presented sincerely, it's not a stupid question. It's a question that is one in which if you really want to see something, ask your questions. This is very, very important. So at that point, then, he said, following this exchange, the Buddha began spending extra time with Suttapantaka. He began to teach him to repeat the phrase, sweep and clean, sweep and clean. And Suttapantaka, however, proved he couldn't remember even that. Even those simple words he couldn't remember. When the other monks learned of this, they decided that he was beyond all hope. The Buddha, however, having unending compassion, continued trying to teach him the phrase. He said, take this broom, and as you sweep the ground, say, I have taught you over and over again. I have taught you over and over again. So the Pantaka did as the Buddha told him, but the other monks weren't happy to see him because he was always brushing and mumbling to himself. What was it? Trying to brush it. And they said that he was disturbing them and told him to stop whatever he's doing. You're driving me nuts. Every time we go into the courtyard, you're there sweeping. Every time we see you, you're sweeping. And it's very interesting because there's a story of this one monk that told his master he wanted to go on a biguan, a solitary retreat, and the master asked him why, and he says, here in the city and in this temple, there's too much noise, too many distractions, too many bothers. I want to go somewhere where it's quiet. And the master said, if you go to the forest, even the stream will bother you. The rustling of the leaves from the wind will bother you. The birds chirping will bother you. The disturbances do not come from outside. And so these monks were actually showing their level because they lacked patience and compassion. They didn't trust the Buddha. They had no faith in what the Buddha was presenting to them. And trying to teach this one poor monk, not abandoning him. And so, and he worked at it all day until he was able to say, without any help to anyone, this sweep and clean, sweep and clean. Then slowly he began to contemplate the words as he swept back and forth across the grounds of the monastery. The words here is that he began to think about it, but that word is wrong. He was contemplating what he was doing. Contemplate, sweep and clean, sweep and clean. contemplation is not cogitation, it's not a sequential thinking. It is just being in that present moment and seeing clean, sweep and clean, sweep and clean. I just sweep and clean. And seeing that in the present moment. So this part is different because this is the true practice in the contemplation. He thought to himself, there are really two things that must be swept and clean. One of them is outside and the other is inside. The dust and the dirt outside of us is easy to clean anyway, but the dust and the dirt inside of us requires great wisdom to clean away. Already we can see he's beginning to get it. The dirt and dust inside of us is nothing other, excuse me, other than our suffering, our greed, our anger, and our selfishness. Suripantaka continued sweeping and he continued contemplating. And as he continued, his mind gradually started to get brighter. Things he had been unable to understand before became understandable to him. And he thought, all of the dust inside of human beings originally is caused by only one thing: desire. Only wisdom can overcome desire. If desire is not overcome, then the cycle of birth and death cannot be escaped, and suffering can never end. Desire causes suffering, and it causes karma, which keeps us lashed to the wheel of birth and death. As long as we are victims of our own desires, we can never be free. So this was the purity of the mind shining through. Here I would change it a little bit, then, as it doesn't completely reflect right view, these particular passages, but it's close to it. As soon as we rid ourselves of all desire, however, our minds will be pure. The mind was originally pure. It's intrinsically pure. I have to say this because it's important that you get this right. And you can see the difference because they say if you're off by an inch, you're off by 1,000 miles. So I want to be clear about this, that I want to change this language here. And it said, and then he says, we will see the truth and we will be free forever. And I would take Hui Ning and teachings and say that the mind is the truth and the mind has always been liberated. There's no obstructions in it. But that's what he was seeing. Suripantaka continued sweeping and thinking like this, and he slowly managed to clean his mind of all its impurities. Gradually, he entered a state of complete equanimity, wherein he had neither desire nor aversions, wherein he saw neither good nor bad, or wherein all previous ignorance was entirely eradicated. Suripantaka became enlightened. I would say he had a realization as to the intrinsic nature of the mind. We could say enlightened in terms of saying that he was clear about this. With his new understanding, he went joyfully to the Buddha. And here, I think I've read different ones where the Buddha noticed him, not him going to the Buddha, because it doesn't seem right. He wouldn't go to the Buddha and go, you know what, I'm enlightened. I don't think he would do that. So I would change the story where the Buddha saw him and saw the progress that he had made. And hold on, let me see. Sorry. The Buddha was full of joy to hear about Suripantaka and said that from that day, that he would become one of the Buddha's most respected disciples. What? The other monks are going like, what? You're talking about Suripantaka, and he's like a chief disciple? I don't understand this, but that monk kind of thinking never will, because they're looking at things from the idea of the ego. Why didn't I get it? Why did he get it? And so he said every day after he could be seen sweeping the grounds, even though now he could understand things, he could read things, he still maintained this practice. And so this source was from called "Where Is Your Buddha Nature?" In Stories to Instruct and Inspire by Venerable Master Sheng. And I would have written it, "Where is the Buddha nature?" It has no place to abide at. So the reason I told you the story is because my student, essentially, although he wasn't sweeping the courtyard, he used the present moment day after day after day, sweeping in the present moment, staying in the present moment and seeing things as they were. Now, there were many people that when he started were well ahead of him. And so we couldn't say he wasn't like Suripantaka, but he, in terms of Dharma development, he had a lot to catch up, but he caught up quickly and surpassed many people just simply from using the present moment. This is living. This is living the life, not grasping and desire and aversions, but seeing clearly moment to moment to moment. I can't say he's enlightened. I can't say that he's perfect, but he has the right view. And it's reflected in the present moment. It's reflected in what he does. And in this way, it makes him special. As long as he doesn't think he's special. So I don't know if he's here today. If he is, don't think you're special. Okay. And so you shouldn't even raise your hand. So what, you have to go to the back of the class now. All right. But in any case, that's something that I think is important to show you about living. And let me see. So the reason is because when we bring the mind to the present moment, we become aware of body, speech, and mind. Body, speech, and mind, they reflect the Sambhogakaya, the Dharmakaya, and the Nirmanakaya in everything that's being done. They reflect we're aware of why things are arising by virtue of Pratika Samappada. The Master Sheng said the Buddha is in the present moment. Pratika Samappada is in the present moment. The Buddha is not other than Pratika Samappada, causes and conditions never fail. We don't understand that. We can't understand that because that's like to the Christians, the example of the burning bush talking, and we go, to the Christians, a burning bush appeared and was giving instructions, and people couldn't get that. That doesn't even make any sense. In terms of things. So then in the New Testament, then God sent down his son Jesus because nobody wanted to pay attention to the burning bush. And so it's difficult for us to understand that because we don't understand that this mind it doesn't have an abode, a dwelling place, yet it dwells everywhere. And we go, well, that sounds like nonsense. It sounds like nonsense from the samsaric point of view, because the samsaric point of view is limited by its experiences. So if somebody had always lived in the country, they only know the country. And somebody who lived in the city only knows the city. They don't know about animals and pastures and crops and things. And the countryman doesn't know about rapid transit and emails and everything else. They're limited to what they're doing. But just imagine that if you lived your entire life in a bubble, and this is all you know. The realization of turning the mind's eye inward is that the mind can experience what's in the bubble, but also outside the bubble, because it created it. Again, this is the shortcut. To know all the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, perceive that all Dharma, Dhatu nature is created by the mind. The shortcut. If you want to practice well, if you want to sit in meditation, if you want to truly live your life, then you follow these, you follow the Buddhas and study. But that's for next week, and we'll talk about the 10 great vows of Samantabhadra, okay? Because that too is all about living. So if you want to get a head start, review those 10 great vows before next week, because it's something that will help you a lot in preparing for what I'm going to say. I don't mind you reading along with me in terms of this. I've read those so many times, and I just recently reread it, and I was so surprised how much dirt I left in the courtyard. So hopefully I can sweep some of that up this time as well. So that's the lecture. Thank you for listening to me. I hope this is helpful in your daily life, in terms of how you should live your life. Amitofo. I will take questions.
Would I be able to start off?
Sure, you've been champing at the bit.
Well, I don't want to, if anybody else wanted to speak up, but so with my experience with Buddhism, I'm very fresh to it. I've only been part of Dharma Drum for roughly about 2 weeks now, so yeah, I definitely relate a lot to the stories you kind of just referenced to, quite specifically your student in a sense, and then also I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, with the sweep, clean sweep, clean, so it's the matter of like getting my mind to a point where I could fully develop the all the lessons that you teach, and just the whole all the precepts and whatnot, because it is it's not super complex, but it's complex in our minds, because if somebody isn't conditioned for these types of teachings and stuff, they have no clue as to what it's like. Another language might as well be another language, at least for me. That's how I perceive it right now. And so my question mainly, and me and you, Gilbert, have spoken privately with our conversations where I'm kind of at, and I would say I'm like, I don't know if you really touched on this a little bit in the beginning of this, but the suffering of suffering. So the conditioned arising, I feel that's the closest thing is to where I'm kind of at a stage of right now in the process of the nature of suffering and the setting in motion of the Dharma wheel.
Yeah, I think the biggest advice I would give you right now is just be patient. Treat every moment as if you're a beginner. Never think I've got it. Practice sincerely. Again, patience is very, very important here.
Mm.
Yeah, and you're right. This is like a whole different language because the language is not one of samsara. We talk about samsara being this worldly existence. So if you ever hear the term samsara, it means this worldly existence that we believe to be real. We knock on the table, it's real. But in fact, it's a dream. We don't understand that. We can't even begin to understand that. So, because of that ignorance, we think that we are actually living and that we're permanent, but we're not. No, you come back 100 years and see if you can make that argument. Um, and short of a zombie epidemic, I don't think you could do it. So the thing is that we see things as they are and clear. This idea that we talk about, even in Buddhism, right view, is not something that is regularly presented, at least in the manner in which I present it. Some people do it, and I'm really very happy that they do it because this is something that can lead to major realizations in terms of it. Just be patient, ask your
Yeah.
questions, as they come up, and you'll do fine. Sure, you're welcome here. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. If there weren't beginners and people coming up and asking questions, this is how we measure ourselves and how
Mhm.
we see how we progress. So I'm always relying. I mean, Sam, the next one coming up is like a step ahead of you, but
Yeah.
he's always asked sincere questions. So go ahead,
Yeah.
Sam.
Sam's a good dude. I've had
Yeah,
a couple interactions with him most recently. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, Sam.
Hey, Gilbert. Really quick, before I say anything though, Santa, I saw you had your hand raised first. Did you want to say something first before I go? I'm sorry.
Now, this was just right after, towards the end of your lecture, Gilbert. When you said something, I was just thinking that, you're in a bubble and there's you in the bubble and turning the mind's eye inward. I was just thinking that, instead, um, to, to see from the mind's eye, because no matter if you think you got to turn your eye inward, you're kind of still in the bubble. So it was just a comment.
Yes, it's very tricky. And this is something I mentioned before. I actually mentioned in San Francisco that the Buddha, Master Shen once asked at a retreat that it is said that there is um, the regular eye, the enhanced eye, like a telescope and microscope, the third eye, the Dharma eye, the wisdom eye, and the Buddha eye. Which eye does the Buddha use? And everybody's going, well, including me. Here I was Ananda. Well, everybody knows he uses the Buddha eye. And Shifu just said, he uses all of them.
Mm.
And this is really impactful in terms of this because it's not, as I had mentioned, that there's no locale to the Buddha mind. We can't think of it when we say turning the mind's eye inward, that there's an inward way, because the Buddha is outside and inside the bubble, can only be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so all things are known to the Buddha mind. And so the Buddha's perception again is not this linear perception. It's the perception such as from Kuan Yin Bodhisattva perceiving from Buddha perception that everything is empty. So thank you, Santa, because it's kind of an interesting one, and it bears
Yeah.
reminding.
Yeah, and it's always hard to talk about it. I mean, how can you talk with but it was just like kind of, bothering me. You're in the bubble and then turning your eye inward. It's got
It's
to be the
interesting.
mind's eye. And the mind's eye is in the bubble too, but it's the mind's eye.
But it's great. I mean, this is what you should be doing with this, and it will create a quantum leap in all of this, because all of a sudden you're seeing and you're going, what, like, and going back and forth until finally there's no perception, and that's why I was saying what I was saying. That was for you to kind of look at it and go, okay, you're a little bit beyond this. So the people that are really looking at this from a higher level, you're getting the esoteric information, and that's where this comes in. It's very, very interesting when we look at things in this way, this right view. And I mentioned before, and maybe this will help you understand, that bodhisattvas are said to have um, 1 foot in samsara and 1 foot in the absolute, and they straddle the samsara and everything that's beyond appearances, because whatever's beyond appearances is limited to whatever that has manifested in mind. But mind knows that which has happened before, the lives that have happened before, the lives that are happening now, the suffering that's happening now, and what will happen in the future. It's not limited to this linear processing of time. And that's really important, because when we get to that point, we, just like Nagarjuna, you negate the idea of space and time. And it's wonderful, because there's nothing there in words that can help you do that. You have to transcend the idea of somebody even understanding this. So it's good. So that's a real healthy approach that's just coming in, and it's just coming pam, 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 going back and forth, back and forth. And the self wants to try to get it. I can't get it. No. And it just keeps flipping, like, very, very quickly. And almost kaleidoscopic in terms of how it's constantly changing for us in such a split second of time. All of that's being processed. So it's good. Okay. We'll go back to Sam.
Thank you. That was awesome. So really quick before I actually ask my question, Gilbert, you made me think of, when you were talking about Master Sheng earlier, you made me think of my favorite quote from him, or like thing he shared. Because I'm reading with Dharma Drum, we're reading Chan and Enlightenment, Master Sheng book, and he mentions in there, he's speaking to a lay colleague, someone who's not a monk, and the person came to him and was like, Shifu, I am like, I got a promotion, like it was a big promotion in a corporate company, and he like became like a chief financial officer or something. And he was like so excited, and he's like, isn't that great? And Master Sheng says that he looked back at him and said, that's how unfortunate. One day you will have to quit, be fired, or you'll have to retire. And I loved, I mean, one of the quotes you shared reminded me of that in similarity. And I really find the message there to be, I mean, just unbelievably deep, but it's such a, on the surface, to someone who doesn't see clearly, it's such a, it can seem like an insult or like invalidation almost, but really it was a very caring answer. But I just wanted to share that. I'm sorry. My question for you was, I have begun reading the Lotus Sutra, and I've been contemplating one specific chapter for weeks, which is the skillful means, just the second chapter. And Buddha talks about, he gets like 5,000 monks and nuns to leave, because he told them that he'd been essentially like, he'd been telling them there was 3 journeys, but there was really 1 journey. And I think, if I'm seeing it correctly, the 1 journey he keeps talking about is the bodhisattva, like the bodhisattva journey. And he says that he doesn't teach those that are seeking personal desire or personal liberation or personal illumination, and that all he teaches is how to be a bodhisattva, and all that he teaches is that we're doing this for others. It seems like
Buddha, was that the Buddha or Manjushri? I think it was Manjushri.
Manjushri was talking to Maitreya in the introduction, so it may have. I get a little confused with who's talking sometimes, because it'll say talking.
All right, I just want I think it was Manjushri that was speaking to these monks, but your story is good so far.
Thank you. It's going to lead to a question, I swear. I'm sorry I'm so long-winded sometimes, but This one journey that the Buddha keeps talking about, and how the monks left when he told them there was really only one journey, not three. And he refers to the other ones as the lesser journeys. And is it because these lesser journeys are based still around this doing it for oneself rather than doing it for others because of the realization of no self?
What it was that's very interesting there was that he was teaching these monks, but he was telling them that there was no liberation, and they were stunned. They're going like, "Wait, we've been practicing, and we've been practicing this practice of denial and for enjoyments and things, and you tell us there's no liberation. So what's the use of all of this if there's nothing that we get at the end?" And so they all in mass all left, and then Manjushri went back and under a different disguise, literally a disguise, and was as some kind of an old mendicant that was walking along and saying, "Where are you guys all coming from? What happened?" And when they explained and said, "Ah, Manjushri, he's saying that there's nothing to gain from all of this, and we quit. I gave up meat. I gave up Pepsi for this. Gave up drinking, whatever it was, and I get nothing out of it, you know. And so then the mendicant, which was Manjushri, then was essentially telling them that 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 he would ask questions until he finally turned it around. So they go, you know what, he's got something there. And so in the end, they finally went back and understood what was happening, and they were learning from him again. So they turned around and went back to the hall and continued studying with him. But the point is, and it's a good one, Sam, and that's the one that scares people, is that people want to become a polished person in samsara, a perfect person, rather than seeing clearly. The shortcut is that it's all created by the mind. That if we see that and abide by that moment to moment to moment, then there's nothing to attain, because originally you already have it. This was the ignorance of the monks, because, and it was said in there that it was from their ego that couldn't see that, and their ego wanted them to get to a certain level, and it isn't in that way. Okay, so it's a very good story that you said. One story that I'll tell you about Shifu. And by the way, this whole time, if you've noticed, I've told a lot of stories, and this is what I'm going to be doing in this living part, is bringing up all these stories about living. Once Shifu, at the end of a retreat, was letting people speak, and there was this wonderful old man. I say wonderful old man. He's probably my age, when he was saying this, but that tells you how long ago it was that I could see him as an old man, not realizing I'm an old man too. But in any case, it was so neat. He kind of went like this, and he went, "Shifu, I hope I die before you." And Shifu was just, "Why?" And he said, "Because if you die before me, I will miss you so much." And so Shifu was just looking for a long time, kind of this pregnant pause, just looking down. "If you die before me, I shall not miss you." And people gave kind of a nervous laugh. But again, Sam, you got on that one, the moral of the meaning of it, in what you were saying. But it was essentially, it was perfect. You don't, because this person is not real, and you don't cling to that. Of course, it's proper to help people and to do things, but you don't cling to those things and suffer from it. So Shifu was saying things in a very natural way, and it came out. People were uncomfortable about it because they were seeing that from the viewpoint that Shifu's not going to miss me if I die, gosh, that's kind of bad. No, but he wouldn't be a master if he would have said it any other way. It's wonderful, and these are the stories that I remember, that I pass on to other people, because this is so important for us to see the profoundness in these very simple actions that are there. So anyway, thank you for that story. I think that worked very well. Now I think Robert, you were next, right? Or was it Tori? Robert? All right. Hold on.
Okay,
25 words or less, because at the retreat you went on for 2 hours.
thank you, Gilbert. But I particularly want to thank Matt Dandenberg. Matt just now said something that really triggered, helped me recall what happened 5 years ago, when at that time I was an early learner of Dharma. And it is really it strikes me as very complex, a lot of words, a lot of knowledge to digest. And then you have to also learn awareness. And then all of a sudden I felt that, Jesus, this is so complex. It's like the more I'm aware, there is more arrows shooting at me. And Gilbert, you say 1,000 or 10,000 enemy. And then Gilbert talk about that story. What strikes me is the complexity can be, you just help me recall, the complexity, the only way that seems to counter it is simplicity. The simplicity of staying in the moment is like turning my mind around into a white paper. Staying in that moment, it just helped me slow down, literally close the door to such a small, narrow slit that I process event right at the moment. And then the simplicity of almost to a point of quietness seems to help me to counter the complexity that Matt, you were using earlier today. And thank you for helping me, because it brings me back to the beginner's mind back then. It's just amazing what you just said. So I wanted to say appreciate.
Yeah, the thing is
You're welcome, Robert. No problem, man.
it reminds me of the Chan poem. The supreme way is not difficult as long as we don't pick and choose. So when one is in the present moment and we're not picking and choosing, seeing things that are sacred or profane, up and down, this way, that way, then it's simple, like you're saying. I always talk about how Chan is simple. Living this life as an ego is hard. No, because we have our ups and downs, and we measure our life with, how many downs there are and how many ups there are, or whatever. But the life is very simple. It is what it is, and we understand it. But it's not something that we, if we engage in it, where we buy into it and buy in with desire and aversions, then it becomes very complicated and very confusing. But when one practices sincerely, it is simple. So you're right about that. Okay, Tori.
Thank you, Gilbert, for today's talk. So my question is that earlier you mentioned that Bodhisattva, they straddle, they have one foot in the samsara and the other foot is in beyond samsara. And I was thinking, wouldn't be meditation, or specifically the silent illumination, that practice is training us to be able to do that, to straddle as well?
Yes, absolutely. It does that if we don't pick and choose, because in Mo Chao, when we're sitting in silent illumination, we're just simply sitting. There's nothing else that we're doing. We're just sitting. We're resting the mind in the present moment. We don't pay attention to what's rising and falling, yet that not paying attention to it enables the mind to clearly see what is arising and falling, not only what is arising and falling, but why it is there and why it's coming up more often than other things that are coming up in mind. So it's something that is important. When we see it in this way, it changes the whole equation, because there's no longer a life and being, a personality, or an ego that is sitting there hoping to get it right. You let go of all of that. And what was being said, that it's very, very simple. It is. It's extremely simple if you just sit. All you have to do is just sit. All the masters talk about that. As long as you don't pick and choose, you know. Have you seen the man of the Tao who has nothing to do? Nothing to do. So when you're sitting, you have nothing to do. You're just sitting. That's what makes silent illumination work. If we say I am sitting here, then it really doesn't work. But if we just let everything go, then the mind will still be there, but it will be it will see things clearly, including that which arises and falls, simply because that's mind too, but that's the transparent fish. So when you're sitting, you just sit. It's wonderful. There's nothing to do. You just sit. But people mess it up. They go, when's that time bell going to ring? I'm hungry. You know, I don't know if this is working, or it's working really good. I haven't had a thought for so many minutes, or whatever it is. No, you disengage the mind that desires a continuance. Okay, you disengage that mind. Mind is left. The true mind is left in the present moment. That present moment has nothing to do with the present moment of a samsara being, where now's the present moment, now's the present moment, now's the present moment. It's never been born, never been created. It is just this way. It's the thusness of that mind. So when you sit correctly with the mind's eye turned inward, in terms of the mind's eye turned inward, you know, which means it's omnidirectional, then there's you can't say a liberation there. There is just simply the way mind is, without saying is, or even without calling it mind. There is something there that's not mind, not consciousness. Yet it doesn't negate the not, whatever it is. All of that stuff belongs to mind. All of the doubts belong to mind. All of the obstructions belong to mind. All the vexations belong to mind. That is where everything was created. But we only cling to those obstructions, all those vexations, all those aversions, and we lose sight of this wonderful mind. And when we practice in this way, we come back to samsara, even if we haven't in this lifetime left it. With realizations, you still come back to samsara and go about doing the business of awakening other Buddhas. That's just the way it is. So everyone has this Buddha mind, but they're slumbering in all of these obstructions that appear to hide the wonderful brilliance of the mind. It only hides it in samsara, only in the bubble. The mind has never lost its luminosity, ever. Only in this little bubble does it not appear that way. But the mind has an interest of just popping that bubble. So that's how you practice. Good.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, Gilbert. Thank you.
All right. Okay. I'll get back to you, Matt, but I just want to make sure is there any other questions? Nobody has a question?
Yeah, I think Mike, Mikhail does.
Michael?
Well, is something which the one story which about the sweep reminded me of another story of Shifu's life, which may be interesting because it shows how powerful the mind can be, and it in changing, also affecting the body and everything about the practice. So it's a story where apparently Shifu he grew up in very undernourished conditions. So he describes it himself in his biography. He had a cognitive deficit. He couldn't learn anything. He couldn't memorize anything. And then when he became a novice at the age of 13, I think his master advised him to do repentance practice, like 500 prostrations in the morning and 500 in the evening. And he did it for 6 months. And after 6 months, it clicked. And he was one of the first monks to ever get a PhD later in life. So this only shows the power of prostration practice. And maybe you can comment on this, how this works.
Yeah, I ran out of time. It was coming up next in my notes, but we didn't get there. And that was the story. And there was actually a story of him when he was in his 7-year retreat, where he was doing prostrations to Kuan Yin Bodhisattva. And those prostrations helped him clear his mind and frame everything in the right way. And that again is the sweep. And I wanted to, and thank you for presenting that, because I did want to talk about that. I just ran out of time, but it was something to me, it was important, because when we see these living examples like this then we see that this is the way, this is how we do things. And this ability to practice sincerely is very, very important. And so it doesn't mean that if we, like the 5 ascetics, eschew all worldly comforts, that we can get enlightenment. But the thing is it's the sincerity in the process, whether we're sitting in meditation or whatever we're doing in our life, that's what matters. So thank you for doing that. So I think that's going to be it today. I'm sorry, we'll have to pick up. Save your questions for next week. I want to keep this within close to an hour and a half. Good questions, good comments. This is what makes this Mindwork Forum good, and what makes it special is that you have an ability to ask your questions. And again, there are no stupid questions. If you're asking them sincerely, it doesn't matter, in terms of that. And so I really appreciate it, whether they're from advanced practitioners or beginners, everything. This is the way that we practice, okay, and live. Okay, so save up your questions for next week. We'll see you then.